So do you need a little bit more help with this lab? Well, that's okay. I'm fine with offering a little bit more help. We would be doing a lot of this together if we were face to face. So this is the help me, Dr. Lennon. I need a little more help, and that's okay. I'll start off with a couple of questions to see how you're feeling, and this will help you pinpoint where you might be having some trouble. So how many alleles for flower color does a true breeding purple flowered plant have? 0, 1, 2, or 4? All right, choose your answer. Okay, so if you have your plant, well, here's your plant. All right, and it's purple. And it's true breeding. Well, that tells us that it must be homozygous. All right, if it's purple, that tells us it must be homozygous dominant. Right, and we also know that each individual organism gets one allele from each parent. Or they can be alike or different. In this case, that true breeding purple flowered plant, because it's homozygous, has 2 that are the same. So how many alleles for flower color does a true breeding purple flowered plant have? 2. All right, now a squirrel with a fluffy tail is mated with a squirrel with a thin tail. All of their offspring have fluffy tails. What is most likely true? All right, so fluffy tail, that's his tail, looks like salmon, mated with thin tail. So tail 1 and tail 2. If we mate those 2 together, we get offspring that all have fluffy tails. What is most likely true? Well, if we see no offspring with tail 2, that must mean that this one is recessive. Ooh, can't write over there, recessive. Right, and if all the offspring have tail 1, that must mean that this one is dominant. So what's true? Fluffy tails are dominant and thin tails are recessive. All right, now you're going to be looking at your own traits. I wanted to use one that was relatively straightforward for this example. Now, you'll need a mirror for this or to ask a friend to look, and you're going to be looking to see if your earlobes are attached, like the one on the right, and you want to look right here. Right, is it attached to the skull? Oftentimes it'll be smooth. Sometimes it'll have a little bit of a dimple, like this one does. Or is it detached? Again, you're looking right here, and you can see it's not attached there. If you were to grab this with your fingers, you could wiggle it back and forth. And some of us have a little bit in between. All right, so now the detached earlobes are dominant. And the attached earlobes are recessive. All right, we're just told this. This is the important part. They told us this, we know this part. All right, so we know that if you're recessive, we know your genotype. All right, so the attached earlobes, right, that is the phenotype. All right, detached is also the phenotype, the physical characteristics, what we see. So because these guys are dominant, that means that we call the gene the D gene, right? D for detached. It gets the letter, right? If you have a hard time remembering this, you can think about in society what gets the name, right? Usually we think of the dominant thing getting the name. We think about this sadly with marriage. Oftentimes a woman will change her name to her husband's last name and becomes part of his family historically. And so the dominant gets the name. Well, I didn't change my name, but that's okay. We have evolved a little bit in society where we don't have to do that anymore, right? So this is a classic example of the dominant trait gets the letter, right? So we would say it's the D gene, and we would know that this one must have a little d. Not only one little d, but the genotype, right, the genes involved, tells us that this one must be little d, or homozygous recessive. So if you have attached earlobes, you know your genotype. You are homozygous recessive, little d, Now, if you have detached earlobes, well, you got a couple options. You could be homozygous dominant, or you could be heterozygous. So if you have detached earlobes in that spot in your lab, you're going to write big D, homozygous dominant, or big D, heterozygous. So that's how you'll figure that out. Just go through one by one. Right? If you're in between, well, then just put in between and we'll get that data from you as we go through. Now you're also going to be looking at blood type genetics. Right? I want you to follow the links on the website for the D2L site and learn about blood type. Right? When you go to take the blood type game, you want to do this one. Right? Play the quick game with the same patients. Right? Blood type is kind of interesting. Right? So with blood type, we have something where we have more than two possibilities. Right? We also have this thing called codominance. And that is that both alleles are equally expressed. So we have a codominance, and the codominant alleles are going to be the A and the B. And then we also have a recessive condition. Recessive condition is going to give you the O blood type. So basically, let's look at it this way. You have a red blood cell. All right, we'll draw it like this cute little circle. Now, if you have type A blood, well, then you have one shape of carbohydrate tag on your blood cell. Right? I'm making up the shape, so when you do this online, you'll see it's not necessarily just this shape. Now, if you have B, you have a different shape. Now, these are carbohydrates that are secreted by the cell to the plasma membrane surface of the red blood cell. Now, if you have AB blood type, then you have both. Right? So A and B, when present, are both seen. Neither one of them is completely dominant. They're both seen. Now, if you have type O blood, right, here's your red blood cell, you're naked. Right, you don't have any of those. This is really, really important when we're thinking about donating blood or accepting blood if you're in the position where you need to accept blood. Because if you have type A blood and they give you B, your cells are going to recognize that blood as foreign, right? As something that's not supposed to be in there. And we can use that sort of phraseology when we're talking about blood cells. Right, so they're thinking about this as an invader, as some sort of disease, and if you give someone who has type A blood a type B blood transfusion, you can kill them relatively quickly. Right, if you have type A blood and we give you AB, the same thing will happen. If you have type A blood and we give you type O, well, there's nothing on the surface of the type O blood cell for your body to recognize, so you'd be fine. Right, we think about type O as often one of the almost universal donor. So basically, if we were to look at the genetics of this, if you're type A blood, you're either big A, or big A, O. If you're type B, you're big B, or big B, O, which is, you never want to be BO. All right, if you're type AB, well, you're AB. All right, if you're type O, you have to be, because we said it is recessive, you have to be OO. Right, so that gets into really important things when we talk about genetics. Now, you may have heard about this thing called Rh factor. Right, that's a different gene. And you'll look at that when you do the online version of this. All right, that's a different gene, and either you're Rh positive, which means you have an extra tag or carbohydrate on your red blood cell, or you're Rh negative, which means you're even more naked. Right, so if you are type O negative, well, that means you are absolutely the universal donor, because there's nothing on the surface of your blood cells that can be recognized by another organism. Right, so we think of the O negatives as the universal donors. So you're going to be doing some genetics problems, and what we're looking at is, okay, we have our mother, right, and most likely we don't question that unless we have a child that's been found wandering in the woods, and there have been instances of children being abducted or children disappearing, and then years later they come back, and we need to look to see whether they really are the child that they claim to be, or if the parents that are trying to claim them really are their parents, right? That's important, right? This kind of thing came into play when we had the families separated at the Mexican border, where they were taking families and separating them, and later they were releasing the children to family members. There was a problem where people were pretending that that was their child. Well, we need to make sure that's your child. So we can use genetic analyses to make sure that is a family member, right? It's sad to think about the idea that someone could go claim a child and then sell them into sex trafficking, but that's a concern, right? So we can make sure that these people are the parents, right? This is a very basic level looking at it. So we have our mother and we have our man, or our father, prospective father, and we want to know, is this child likely to be this man's child? Right, so mom, she's A, so that means she's either AA or AO. He's B, he's either BB or BO. Makes me laugh every time. All right, so looking at this, if she's AA, that means that she's going to make an egg that's an A, or an egg that's an A. If that child got either one of those eggs, it would have to be at least one A, so it would be an AB. So she can't be AA. All right, if she were AO, she'd make an egg that's an O, or an A, an egg that's an A, or an egg that's an O. All right, so that's possible. And if he were big B, his spermies would be a big B or a big B. So let's try that. All right, if we make a Punnett square, this is really hard to do, and we have big B, well, we'd have AB, BO, and BO. All right, so the child is either big B, or BO. So looking at this, are any of these BO? Yeah, half of them. All right, so this could definitely be the father of this child, and this could definitely be the mother of this child. Let's try another one. All right, so here we have mom. Mom is a type B, so she is either big B, or big B, O. Here's dad. He is type AB. Well, he's AB, period. All right, here's his sperm. Half of them are A, half of them are B. All right, so for her, we have a child who is a B. All right, so if she's big B, she's got all eggs that are B. All right, so let's do a Punnett square. So we have mom, big B. We have dad, A, B. Child would be A, B, 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 A, B, or B, B. So is it possible for these two to have a child with type AB? Yep, absolutely. They have a 50-50 chance, right? And this is, we think about this like tossing the coin every time. The Punnett square represents every sexual encounter. So every time these two individuals have sex and have a fertilization event happen, there's a 50% chance that they can have offspring with an AB blood type, and a 50% chance they'll have offspring with a BB blood type. Next time they have sex, same thing, over and over again. Right? That's why when we think about people, if you have a daughter for your first child, that does not mean you're going to have a son for your second child. Right? There's a 50-50 chance every time you have a fertilization event that you're going to have one or the other. So it's probability.